We'll be looking at the two-sum problem today. Given an array of integers nums and an integer target, return indices of the two numbers such that they add up to target. You may assume that each input will have exactly one solution, and you may not use the same elements twice. You can return the answer in any order. As an example, input nums 2, 7, 11, 15, and if the target's 9, your output should be 0, 1 because nums 0 and nums 1, they add up to 9. Therefore, we return 0, 1. Similarly, if nums was 3 to 4 and target was 6, the output would be 1 and 2. This is very simple, very common problem, but the acceptance rate is not very high. So we will be looking at two solutions. We'll be looking at the one that's brute force, that's probably the most obvious one, and then we'll be looking at a more optimized algorithm. So brute solution would be that you start with one number and then you go through other numbers, add up each one and see if that meets the target, and you repeat that for each of these elements. So this should be pretty easy to code up. I'll just open up a Visual Studio Code here. So first we'll be going through each element. Okay, so that I have defined the first index, first number that we're dealing with, and then we'll go through all the other elements to see if you can hit the target. Cool. Just copy and paste that. And yeah, so this is the brute force way. And one thing that to notice is it's not a very optimized algorithm because the complexity is n squared, because we're doing a for loop for each of these elements, and then for each of these elements we're doing another for loop. So it's n squared, and in fact there is a way to do it with the complexity of n, and the way to do that is our second algorithm. The second algorithm works very simple. So we will again go through each element in the array, and for each of those elements we'll compute target minus that element, and then we will see if the target minus the element exists in the array. So let's try code that up too. It starts out very similar. And the function we want to use is index of and in fact because we're going over each element in the array, once we go over them we want to make them 0 so that we don't pick up the element that we are going through. So the -1 is because if the index of does not find that element inside the nums, it will return -1. So I'm saying unless you don't find an element, or another way of saying is if you find an element, return I and second index. I'll copy and paste this. There's an error here. Okay, it's because I'm making the nums I 0, so I think what I'll have to do is I'll have to define this first. That's the first number. I'll put it in there, and then yeah, this should work. Yeah, there you go. In fact, while explaining this, I realized that this might not be optimal still, because we're going over each element once in the array, and then for each of these elements we're doing an index of, which has a complexity of n, I believe, as well. So this is still a n² complexity algorithm, but it's another way to look at it, and it's some people might consider it a bit more cleaner algorithm than the brute force one that we looked. So yeah, I thought this was interesting because it's a very simple, very common problem, but it has got not that high of an acceptance rate. So I hope you found this useful. Thanks everyone.